Greetings. It's been a while. As many of you know, I was sitting in a cave in some holy city in Israel, a city called Sfat, and I was contemplating my return to Europe with a lot of duress, to be honest, because I had a very intense experience the last time I was on this continent. And that's people on Twitter that are excited that I'm posting again. I'm sorry, it's been a while. It's taken me a little while to get into the space where I could start to share again. But right now the mission is to share because I have a greater story of the difficulties and things that I faced in Europe previously, that now I have quite a strong contrast to, because I've actually moved to a more democratic as opposed to socialist country where I spent like the last year revitalizing my love of self after living in cultures who felt like I was pretty much useless or worthless because I was an artist or a musician or not some fancy robots succumbing into their systemic abuses, which is how I look at it. As you know, like my whole mission in life is to study culture, to align that with history as well, and to look at the patterns throughout history and different things like this that sort of explain culture. What I'm waking up to today is the fact that I realize the world is like losing its propensity for compassion. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I'm just in a world where the word compassion doesn't exist, because from what I've heard, it's not even a word in some European languages, or if it's just that, I mean, I think I see it more clearly now than ever before, because I went from a cold, compassionless place into a place full of compassion, and spent almost a year there getting my strength back so I could come back into the cold, compassionless place and fight all these useless battles, which are really futile. They're not futile because they're real and they're traumatic and they're intense. And I feel sorry for any migrant in any culture that was previously run by Nazis, to be honest with you, because I find these extremes most extreme in the cultures where the Nazis were a dominant and supportive force. In the process, I'm sort of getting really deep into that history, and also seeing correlations within non-governmental agencies that are now ruining people's lives who were also supported by the Nazis, which I find very interesting. I think, you know, there are probably things going on that we are utterly oblivious to. I know that in certain countries here in Europe right now, they are literally criminalizing the poor. Like, you know, there's big like programs, like big commercialized like programs where they're literally trying to teach people to hate poor, hate the beggars. Like in the UK right now in train stations, you know, they have pictures of people begging, and then they're claiming that they're just going to spend the money on alcohol, or they're just going to spend the money on drugs, and you shouldn't give money to these poor people because they're just bad dynamics of society that should not be helped in any way. And the irony is these NGOs that were linked to the Nazis, as a matter of fact, Salvation Army being the only religious organization that was allowed to operate with the Nazis, okay, they're actually lobbying for harsher penalties and more criminalization of these dynamics of society, because once they become policed and within the system, then the system will give the Salvation Army more money to help these poor people that they've lobbied to actually criminalize. It happens the same way in Europe regarding the child exploitation that's taking place. which is my next mission. Actually, I'm going to be devoting a huge portion of my time to expose what's happening to families in Europe, particularly migrant and foreign families. Right now, just recently, the Czech president actually accused Norway of their child protective services being like Lebensborn, which was the Nazi breeding program. Ironically, these organizations that are supporting this exploitation of children are the Salvation Army. So it makes me wonder, considering their connection to the Nazis, if they are actually somehow really perpetuating the whole process. Basically, what the Nazis would do is that they would be taking all these Jews and unwanteds from society, but if the child happened to have a special interest to them, for example, if the child was blonde hair, blue-eyed, had strong genes, had this, had that, then the Nazis would actually take them into a program that would indoctrinate them. And they actually believed the ages 7 and 9 were the perfect ages for indoctrination. So a lot of the children that are being taken by these organizations unjustly, and you can Google child abduction by Dutch social services to see EU Parliament hearings that actually expose the level of injustice. Currently on RT, they just exposed in this one where the Czech president is like standing up for one of its own citizens that's had its children kidnapped for unjust reasons. Apparently a child was taken into foster care because she was in a bad mood. Yeah, and I've actually talked to people in Holland where they were investigated for 6 months because the child was serious. And looking further into it, you actually see that there is this thing called the best interest of the child, which is not defined, which actually leaves it to an individual to decide what the best interest of the child is. And it's not in their interest to reunite families, to even assist the mother in being reunited with the family. It's in their interest to get the funding from the government that actually essentially incarcerates small children. It doesn't feel like incarceration because they're buying them toys and things like that, which right now, because the court situation and my situation is getting very intense. My daughter just got a new bike. My son just got a whole box of Bakugan. And I'm noticing a correlation between the gift giving and the intensity of the legal process. And they've even moved my daughter back into a home they removed her from, which was the one that she liked the most because it was the only one that gave her art supplies and, you know, this kind of thing. So anyway, that's like a deep thing, and I'm actually going into that on a completely another channel called Frisian and Zion, because this is going to be like my mission. But what I'm here to talk about today is dynamics of culture that really, I feel like it's being bred out of us, this desire to care about one another, to help each other. Maybe it's just that I'm in a society where people don't do that because the government does that. And so anyone who needs help shouldn't go to their friends, shouldn't, you know, because their friends are going to feel burdened. And their friends don't want to do that because that's what the government does. But a migrant or an immigrant doesn't have that option, which is also why these agencies like to prey on migrants and immigrants, because they're vulnerable. Often they don't speak the language. And these things are taking place in our world. The interesting thing for me is the fact that as an American, like I'm pretty much raised by the Hollywood media and whatever to idealize Paris and all these beautiful places. Holland, this utopian place of freedom, you know, when underneath, I mean, actually France was probably the most compassionate of all the cultures that I've experienced in Europe. And of course they fought against the Nazis. Maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. But I find it very, very interesting that it's like, I can't decide, is it the fact that it was never human nature to care about its fellow man? Or is it the fact that modern New Age philosophies are actually teaching us to be more selfish while making us believe that we're more enlightened? It's quite a deep, deep subject, and I'm so stream of consciousness right now that it could go a lot of different places. But I find myself waking today going like, what is happening to compassion, to cultivating compassion? Like, we look down at people, we judge people. For example, in these situations where these children are literally being taken unjustly, with no cause, with no investigation, with no evidence, it's immediate that the public, they can't even fathom that that's reality. They say, oh no, the mother did something wrong. They can't just do that. They can't just come in and rip a family apart with no intention of uniting them. That's not possible, but it is possible. I'm telling you, it's real and it's possible, and it's actually happening to me and like millions of other families, thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of other families in the EU right now, based on the fact that they don't define the best interest of the child. And how this plays into the lack of compassion in our world. Because, you know, we hear the feminists talk all day about slut shaming and like, you know, she wants to be like some wild woman and we can't shame her for that. So why do we shame mothers? Shame mothers who've done nothing wrong but try to provide for their families. Maybe they're not doing as well as others. Maybe they're in a divorce. Maybe they're struggling. Maybe they've been through severe trauma, okay? But instead of saying, you know, what's happening here, we're saying, no, she did something wrong. The government can't do that. But it's not even the government. These are NGOs, non-governmental organizations who have been operating outside the bounds of the law since the Nazis, okay? And I don't even know if some of these programs were like facilitated and indoctrinated by those organizations. It's very sick. I want to find the links. Like finding the link from Salvation Army to the Nazis was very intense because they still persecute other religions. They still persecute homosexuals. They still persecute different races. As a matter of fact, I found them further linked to the eugenics movement before the Nazis, where they literally have a term called racial hygiene. Okay, so it's really, and it goes into a lot of the other things I've discussed, maybe more vocally on Twitter or whatever, about how they use propaganda to get you to fund the very industries that are creating our destruction. Because I can tell you, these industries, they're not, I don't see them helping people. Maybe they're helping their kind. But I've literally had the Salvation Army ridicule my religious or spiritual beliefs in court on 2 different occasions. So what is this saying? And where is our compassion? When we look at the mother who's going through severe trauma, I mean, I don't know, you know, if anyone is a mother, you understand what the image of having your children unjustly ripped from you out of the blue, in my case, for stating we were moving to India in a country we didn't even live, okay? You know, what that does to a mother, you know, and why there's no care for that. And why even friends and family, because they don't want to see or believe that this is really happening, why they shut the door on those people. And I mean, is it because we don't want to think about it? We want to live in some oblivious little bubble that says the world is perfect. I mean, most of my Twitter following is very avid and adamant and active in the fact that there are problems in our world. So I'm not speaking to most of you because you already know we debate these things and discuss them all the time. But the question is like, where is the compassion? Are we being taught to be more and more selfish, or have we as a species always been inherently selfish? And that is the question. Were we taught to be compassionate? I mean, according to some studies, until the 16th century, parents played little interest in their children's lives. So it may be part of our evolution that we've become so caring and attached. But at the same time, are we not willing to acknowledge the devolution that's taking place when we start to not care? I mean, these people think it's crazy that I'm actually emotional about the situation. Like, are European mothers in these countries just saying, "Oh, what can you do?" I mean, is that how it is? But actually trying to fight against these systems in the EU is almost impossible when there's no evidence, no investigation, no proper due process. If you do have a good lawyer, they might be rejected from the court, in which case it happened to me. They rejected my lawyer from the court at the moment that she was able to establish my stability in another country, because I wasn't allowed to stay or live in that country. And to be close to my children. And so what is the story there? That they don't allow you to be close to your children. They don't allow you the right to sustain near your children. And then you're struggling to survive, even to be close to those children. And then the society is looking at you like you're an asshole. Go get a normal job. I can't get a normal job. There are people that are going through shit that don't have the ability to do the things that you're expecting of them. There are people that are in emotional and traumatic states, like these homeless men on the streets who've been fighting in a war, who were thrown to the streets. They were thrown to the streets, and they don't even know what to do because they're broken inside because of the things they were forced to do, or the things that they had to witness that they couldn't psychologically handle, And it's like, I see the fragility of my existence after going in through this like intense trauma. And I see how so much of society just looks down upon these people without even comprehending remotely like the depth of what put them in that place, and why we're no longer seeking to help those people, but actually to criminalize them so that NGOs can profit off exploiting them. And this is the reality that we're living in. It's easy to remain oblivious, as long as you have all your things in place, which looks like it's pretty easy to accomplish in most places. I mean, there's a lot of places where there are no jobs. Telling people to get a normal job when there's no job market to get, These people are suffering and they are struggling, and their friends and their family and the people around them are just like turning their backs on them, or they're going, "What's wrong with you? Why can't you like be a slave like everybody else? You need something. Okay, work for pennies for me, and then you'll achieve it eventually." And as if I'm supposed to buy into some slave mentality while I'm already traumatized and unable to have a normal job. So it makes this disenfranchised population like the most exploited population on the planet, which is sick. It's sick. And I can tell you this also from experience, going around cities, even in America, where all of these social agencies are set up. And the first thing they do is they send you to all these social agencies, and you go into all these social agencies and you fill out all their forms. And for every form you fill out, those agencies are getting money. Okay. How many of those agencies helped me? 0. I was tossed around to 50 of them. And I may have mentioned briefly episode 10 years ago where I was told I was dying, and then they never found what I was dying of. But in that interim of trauma I had endured, they sent me around to like 50 social agencies to help me deal with the situation. They all took my paperwork. None of them helped me. So we also live in this illusion that we don't need to help each other because there are social agencies for that. But you're not accepting or understanding that these social agencies are actually built for exploitation and are often doing nothing to help these people. It's very, very frightening and sad, to to witness this, I'm coming from many different streams of life. I mean, I used to be in the corporate world and I drove a Mustang, then I became a restaurateur and owned a cafe, and then I became an artist in my sewing studio, and I started out as a photographer, as a young kid, wide-eyed artist, at least in a city that loved and appreciated its artists. So I was like raised in a culture where it didn't matter as long as you were happy, living in your passion, creating your art, making a statement. That's all that mattered. But now we have systems in place, particularly in Europe, that tell you you want to be an artist, you're crazy, you're never going to survive. You know why they can say you're never going to survive? You're never going to survive because the society is built to ensure that there is no way you can survive if you don't buy in to that structure, which immediately takes the art out of you. It's impossible, and I've explored this deeply. It's a choice you have to make. I made that choice when I left the corporate world. I realized that I could only be happy with my art. And I devoted myself to that, to my art, to my spirituality, to my purpose, to help others in struggle, especially after conquering death. And now, after the horrible divorce, the abusive marriage, and my children being illegally kidnapped by a foreign country that I didn't even live in, okay, for profit. For profit, our children are being exploited for profit. Mothers and families are being destroyed, and the society is being taught to shame those people when there is literally no justice involved in the situation. I never thought, I used to be the same person. I used to say, oh, she had to do something wrong. I mean, they can't just go in there and take children without justification. Okay, no, they can, and they do. And in Europe, there are numerous cases for being grumpy, for falling asleep in class, for complaining about a tooth, a baby tooth. I was actually ridiculed because my son had cavities in his baby teeth at 7 years old when they're about to fall out, okay? Yeah. Most children have cavities in their baby teeth by the age of 7 years old, okay? I mean, let's just say that. I mean, maybe they're anal about dental work or whatever, but I was going through a divorce. I didn't have insurance, and I was just trying to get to solid ground so I could make a plan. And I got offered, I went to a government social worker who is a friend of 13 years who owns a beautiful home, where I lived in a beautiful 2-story home with my children who had their own room in that home, okay? They never investigated that. They had no interest in that. I was divorcing, I was vulnerable, my family was dead. As a matter of fact, they had died in that 3 years. There's no compassion for the fact that I have also lost my mother, my grandmother, and my uncle. My father is already dead, and most of my family has died. So people also look down on you. Why don't you call your family? Why don't you, I'm lucky I do have one really sacred sister who is offering me refuge in America, which I can go to at any time. But the moment I do that, I'm completely alienated from my children. So I'm forced to live in Europe where I can't work, where I can't even really legally reside for more than 3 months at a time. Luckily, I can go to the UK, or I can go to Morocco, or I can fly somewhere else and come back, all so that I can be close to my children. And then people still want to judge me, which is okay. I mean, good for you. But, what kind of compassion is that? What kind of understanding is that? What kind of obliviousness is that? That you can't even be aware of, like, the injustices going on. Those same people can talk about the for-profit prison industry, where incarceration has become a for-profit industry. But they can't even fathom that they would exploit our children in the same way, even though our children are far more lucrative, far easier to manage, and they get a lot more money for kids. They get like 40,000 for a prisoner. They get 100,000 for a kid. 20 of them into a home together where they're getting $2 million. Okay, $2 million. 20 kids in a home. Okay, and I'm telling you right now, the 5 people that are managing those children are not getting $2 million. And I can promise you even more, my daughter, who can't even put peanut butter on her fucking toast, pardon my French, okay, she's not getting $2 million. Where is like $1 million? I mean, those kids are probably raised on 150,000, if even 200,000. So where is the rest of the money going? Who is it paying for? What is it paying for? And people just want to be oblivious, and they mom shame and shame the parents to where the parents have no resources, no help, because everybody thinks they are fucked up. My career has been impacted, possibly destroyed because of this. You know, because in my industry, being a musician, they assume, that's also why they persecute people in specific industries, because they assume, you know. So my ability to sustain, first by having a stable job in India that I was denied, which I was afraid if I took after the fact, I would not be able to see my children or get my children there. One, so I was denied employment, which would have brought me stability with my family. 2 weeks in school in Holland. They were in school for 2 weeks, okay? In 2 weeks, what do you deduce in 2 weeks? You know? And even now, they claim my child was malnourished, and even now they say, oh, it looks like he was small for his age, which is what I told them, because his dad was smaller than I am, shorter than I am, okay? And now, a year later, after torturing my whole family, oops, sorry, I guess he's just normal, you know? And they're doing this to families everywhere. You know what's insane is, at least in America, they say, okay, this is what you need to do, and this is what you need to do, and we're going to help you do this so that you can get your children back. You know what they do in Holland or Norway? Sorry, you're not a resident here. You're not allowed to live here. You can get out, making you more vulnerable and making it more impossible for you to get your children. I actually stayed there for 6 months, found a place to stay, and tried to work with them, thinking like maybe this is America and they're just gonna like, I can work with them and things will come together and I'll get my kids back. Okay, that didn't happen in Holland. So I went to Israel, where in 3 months I had a lease for a year, I had a big apartment, I had everything together. And what happens when it comes time to prove that? They reject the lawyer. They say you're not allowed, and then they move immediately after rejecting the lawyer to remove my parental rights completely and tell me they're going to keep my children forever until they're 18 at least. And this both years, right before Christmas, right before the holidays, you know. So to me, I'm seeing like blatant psychological abuse, blatant exploitation of children. And meanwhile, the society is like blaming the parents. Now, if there's a situation, I even told them straight up, please show me evidence, accuse me. If I've done something wrong, I will accept that. You know, that's fine. But where is it? It's not there. It's never existed. No one's ever demanded it, ever. They are kidnapping our children and exploiting them like they're exploiting prisoners, and nobody cares. Anyway, back to the cultural dynamics, you know. So when I fled after that experience and the lack of compassion and pretty much learning to hate myself because I was just some useless person who isn't doing what society expects of me, and that's why they took my children, I fled to Israel, you know, where actually I was loved for who I was. I was loved for my creativity. I was loved for my spiritual awareness, even regardless of my belief. I was embraced. My sadness and my trauma and my compassion wasn't something that people feared, maybe because that's part of their whole history, is dealing with those dynamics. So the contrast of this cold, you know, exploitative society versus this spiritual, compassionate, caring society. I mean, of course they do it too, and America does it too, and a lot of people are, you know, sometimes though I can talk to people and their ideas are a little bit extreme and I'm like, yeah, it's hard to, you know, but then again, I don't know. Oh, it's very deep stuff. But anyway, I'm back in Europe now, and that's the whole point. And I arrived in Holland optimistic. I was like, I'm going to go back to Europe and I'm going to have a completely different experience. And it's going to be beautiful and everything's going to be great. And I'm going to heal everything and I'm going to rebuild my life. And yeah, that didn't happen. That didn't happen at all. That didn't happen at all. No. As a matter of fact, most people don't even want to think about it. They don't even want to look at what's going on in our world. They don't want to acknowledge the fact that NGOs are really destroying us for their own ends, because they cannot survive without the chaos, okay? They cannot survive if they can't create more children to take away. They can't get more money, they can't get more funding, they can't get more housing, they might not even be able to keep their jobs. You'll find this in the CDC, you'll find this in the UN, you'll find this across all these massive paradigms, okay? This is the truth. What I want to do is start chasing the money and see how many corrupt industries are underlying some of these corrupt NGOs that we see certain politicians attacking now, which I'm very grateful for. And actually we have someone that's being utterly criticized, and they've actually done more to end child exploitation in the last few months than anyone's done in decades, and closing down corrupt adoption agencies. Okay, like this is a huge industry around the world. In the UK, children are being taken from the womb and put up for adoption, you know, and the parents don't even have a birth certificate to claim their child. Okay, could you imagine that? People in loving, happy relationships, fully capable of providing for their children, you know. It was so funny when this happened to me. The first thing I did, I don't know if you're familiar with Dune, but I posted like this Bene Gesserit picture, you know, which was like the Bene Gesserit breeding program. So it's quite ironic now that I like start to study like the Nazis' history of like kidnapping and indoctrinating special children. It was quite funny. Before they took my children, they said, your children are special, like 2 days before they took them. I wonder what their genetics are. I still need to do a genetic thing, because that might explain also why I have like really good ties to Israel and why I have a really bad experience in Europe. Europe is a beautiful place. People really try. I mean, they do try, but within their mentality, it's impossible for me. Like, because all I see is authoritarianism or demandingness or lack of appreciation or lack of value, and definitely a lack of compassion and understanding. I mean, I'm even being humbled by accepting where I am right now emotionally from all of this. I'm very humbled, because I don't really know when someone's mistreatment of me is going to like, and I find it most commonly in specific cultures, the very same cultures that destroyed my sense of self, that destroyed my self-worth, tied to the relationship that also was abusive, you know. And what I see now is that even though in my culture, those behaviors are textbook forms of abuse, they are utterly normal in these cultures. I am the crazy one for calling them abuse, putting someone down all the time, criticizing them all the time, you know, making extreme demands from them. You know, if you do that long enough, a person gets broken. They become sick emotionally. It's not normal. So how does that culture adapt? to that abnormal abuse that is called normal, they become cold. They become compassionless. They shut off their feeling, you know. I'm not capable of that. I feel too much. I'm an empath. Maybe as they want to disorder it, I'm highly sensitive. Okay, so fucking what? That means I feel everything around me. That means I have more compassion than the abnormal, dysfunctional person who doesn't even have a word for it. Okay. And I have been through a lot. Sometimes and that was something else that Israel gave me. The fact that there are people who go through a lot because they're put into a position of understanding they need to be a wise person for the rest of the people, or a compassionate person for other people. And I have always been that person, even now, and it's funny because now I'm starting to see the other people who are struggling with the same cultural dynamics that have broken me, and they can't understand why they're unhappy, why they feel isolated, why they can't adapt. But I'm seeing now, in a very strong contrast, why I can't adapt. Because this is cold, it's unfeeling, it's enslaved. It's like not a mentality that I can adapt to. All my life, I've never experienced this. So much so that enduring it for 5 years has put me into a deep traumatic situation. Because where I come from, that's abuse. That's abusive behavior. And they don't do that. And when they do, there are consequences. Imagine living in a culture where it's normal, where there is no consequence, where that's how everybody treats everybody until they become these cold people who can't trust anyone, who can't open up themselves to anyone. And it's so sad. And I'm seeing it on like almost a systemic level. Like people are being conditioned. Of course, the societies love it. They're some of the strongest economies in the world. Why? Because everyone is utterly enslaved. And it's sad, I mean, sure, I wish I could just go, working in a coffee shop would be like a dream almost, because it's something, it's more simple and more relaxed in a way, even, but I don't even know if I can handle that in a society where everybody is like, you're just here to be exploited. The sad thing is the moment we receive a birth certificate, we become a tradable commodity, and it's important that humans start to consider the fact that we are vessels of exploitation. And if they can't exploit us on one level, then they surely will find ways to exploit us in others, maybe by profiting off kidnapping our children because we don't buy into the society in the way that they would like us to. Meanwhile, the people around that person, how are they uplifting them? How are they giving them strength and encouragement? How are they empowering those people? You need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this, you need to do that. It's your fault you're not doing this, it's your fault you're not doing that. Nobody's trying to help the emotional situation that person is in. I mean, I can tell you that for a fact, as an immigrant, that's probably very, very true for most immigrants, including refugees in Europe right now. Unless they can ship them off to a factory, which might even be behind the whole thing, because nobody wants to work in factories anymore. I've been told I should go work in a factory. I'm like, my country outsourced those jobs. Anyway, not that that's funny, because it's not, but, and no offense to anyone who does work in a factory. I'm glad you have a job. I'm glad you can psychologically endure it, probably because you've been conditioned to adapt to that. I'm from a place where we're supposed to chase our dreams and find something amazing and strive for something greater, which I have done repeatedly in my life, considering where I actually come from. It's actually amazing that I look like this right now, and not like I don't know, some white trash trailer park from North Carolina. Anyway, that's the real story. Some of us fight to get somewhere, you know, and some of us have been through hell to get there. You know, it's insane to me that like one bad relationship has turned me into what, like, you know, actually two bad relationships, and they joined together and ganged up against me, along with like 3 other people that I completely cut from my life from being too toxic. I mean, this is the world we're living in. This is the real fucking world. It's cruel and it's abusive and it's exploitative. And if we don't have each other, if we don't care about each other, if we don't reach out to each other, then what do we have? We just have a bunch of singular individuals caring only about themselves, consuming more than any other dynamic of the population, largely because they are lonely and isolated. You know, maybe we should consider, and I spoke about this not a decade ago, but many years ago on one of my now showed Twitter accounts. Why they're trying to kill me on Twitter, I don't know, but I've been keeping it very quiet in efforts to sustain there. It's very strange. I don't know if I really think maybe it was my IP address because I was in Israel. So it was like, we got to shut up those Israelis, you know, because we need the world to hate them unjustly again, without any understanding for what's really going on in Israel and who's manufactured it and who created it like 70 years ago and what they were doing and how they created all the chaos that was there 30 years before that. You know, history is fucking mind-blowing when you really dig in, when you stop listening to the subtle blurbs of bullshit that are flying across your screen to make you more divided, to make you hate people more, to make you unjustly hate someone you've never even met, all because you watched some image created by who knows who created that. Do you even ask who created that vision of that culture that you're being taught to hate? Have you even asked yourself that? No, you just believe it because actually within yourself, you want to hate those people, and now you have a bigger excuse to hate them. I can tell you, I've only started to judge and hate cultures that have repeatedly abused me personally. Okay? And so when I make a generalization, as much as I hate it, I really hate it. When I make a generalization, I'm making a generalization based on my personal experience as someone who has spanned 4 continents, 11 countries, and 14 US states. And state to state in America is very much like country to country in Europe. But I can tell you, Europe was a better place before the EU, I think. I really do think. What I'm trying to figure out now is the EU behind all of this? You know, because you see all the austerity and all the crackdowns on the culture and all of these things that are taking place because of the pressures that the EU is putting on these small states. One that even drove into bankruptcy while exploiting it, Greece. Okay. People in Portugal are struggling to survive. When I was there in 2001, I mean, people had simple lifestyles, but I don't know. I think they had a better economy and a better culture. But everybody wanted to chase this big bandwagon that was going to take away the borders and open up more jobs and do all of these things. The bandwagon that was really facilitated by former Nazi states. I mean, call me crazy if you want, but there are correlations that are undeniable, you know. And how is that impacting our compassion? I mean, when I look back into the history of what the Nazis did and what they got away with, they were first taught to hate certain aspects of society, not to have compassion for them, not to care about them, to judge them, to persecute them, these dynamics of society. And then they went further to break the families apart, kidnap the children, and then essentially murder 11 million people while the rest of the society pretended nothing was happening. How did that happen? How fragile is our mind that we could unknowingly be complicit in such an atrocity? And we think we're impervious to it? We think they're not teaching that right now, teaching us to hate certain segments of society, to ostracize them, to beat them down, to where at least if the government or the society doesn't murder them in genocide, most of them want to die, many of them begging to return to the war-torn country they fled because of the mistreatment that they're receiving in the places that were supposed to give them refuge, you know? So, I don't know. I know that my friends who've immigrated to America, I mean, they don't sound as traumatized. I mean, there are people that, but when I talk to migrants in Europe, I mean, most of them are happy. They have a business, they have a home. But how they're treated within the society, I mean, my husband broke it down, my ex-husband, when I came to Germany. Oh yeah, well, the Indians were really low, but when the Turks came, then the Indians got a leg up and the Turks were pushed down. So now I guess the Turks get a leg up and the Syrians go to the bottom. You know, I mean, I don't know how this works, you know, but it just seems really fucked up to me, you know. On top of it, when they're preying predominantly on vulnerable foreign mothers in these countries. I mean, this is something that is being overlooked, and it's incredible. It's incredible because until I experienced it, I never started to investigate it. And I really was one of those people too. I was like, oh, she did something wrong. They can't just do that. They have to have justification, right? Well, they don't. And I'm a living, breathing proof. If I could actually read the documents involved in the situation that I'm in, that have never been provided to me in English, I could maybe tell you more. But I don't even know what's going on half the time. My life and my children's lives are in the hands of people I can barely communicate with. Welcome to societies of exploitation, preying on the vulnerabilities of the individuals within their society. I'm a foreigner, so I don't matter. I mean, I'm not even an immigrant. I was like not even a migrant. I was literally staying with a friend to make a plan because of financial difficulties in my divorce. And a country I don't even live in can kidnap my children with no justification, with no evidence, and hold them hostage for 100,000 euro per child per year. And it's not even the government. It's an NGO exploiting the government. I can't even really be angry at the government until I see the EU petitions where these families end up in an EU court. And the EU says, sorry, we can't do anything for you. That's just what they do, you know? I mean, this is the world we're living in, and we're allowing it to escalate because of our obliviousness, because of how quickly we would rather shame a family than question the constructs of our own societies. And we already know that these industries have been operating for profit in other paradigms, but we don't care about criminals. So nobody really, I mean, people are aware of it. They're aware that people are being unjustly incarcerated so that these people can make profit. And they are doing a little bit about it. But many people, they don't care. Those are criminals. So what, right? What about our children, though? What about the children that go into foster care homes and come out of this care with no place to go, with no resources, with no abilities to sustain, that end up often in drugs, and criminal activity in efforts to survive. So what if the whole construct feeds each other? You know, isn't that sick? This is the world we're living in. And like, where is the compassion? You know, we can talk all day about slut shaming, but nobody's talking about mom shaming, family shaming, you know. I mean, of course, in instances of abuse, we want those systems there to protect people, you know, but they realize they make more money and have more resources if they doctor a few little statements. Or if they build a court that doesn't even care, doesn't even investigate, doesn't even say, where's the evidence? Are you know, they just say, okay, whatever you say. That's the state of the family court in Holland. And from what I hear also in Norway and other places where this is taking place, there are specific states within the EU who are facilitating these kinds of behaviors. But the saddest part is when that vulnerable individual is in a society that's already foreign to them, a little bit lost, also struggling, you know, and there's no compassion. And people still, I mean, yeah, it's been a year and a half. It's been a year and a half of me working my ass off to provide stability for my children, only for that not to matter in the end. Then giving up that stability because my children are crying for me and I need to be close to them for their mental health and my own, you know, because after a certain amount of months, it gets harder and harder and the tears become stronger and stronger and the distance and the pain, especially when you're being repeatedly traumatized by the same organizations that are exploiting you to begin with, you know. And the people around you, like, they don't care. They don't care any more than how it benefits them. What are you going to do for them while they help you? They're not giving you emotional support. They're not giving you strength. As a matter of fact, they don't even want to hear about it because it's too fucking intense for them, you know, to even think about it, even though somebody they allegedly care about is going through it. When I care about someone and they're going through shit, I'm going to be there to hug them, to understand what they're going through, to empower them. You know, yeah, you need to do tough love sometimes too, especially in situations where you're dealing with addicts or people like that. And that's the sad part in these cultures, especially like Holland. I can say specifically the number of like addiction issues and things like that that are going on. These are things that also contribute to the lack of the compassion in the society, because people feel like they have to stop caring in order to protect themselves. So they build a society full of dysfunction, which allows the people to shut off more, isolate more. And you know what that person is sitting there doing? They're looking on the internet at what they're going to buy today, because that's all they have. They have their job. They have the things they can buy from that job that give them some value. And they have that little bit of time for themselves once, maybe twice a week if they're lucky. You know, my friend has one day off. She works in social work. She helps homeless people, ironically, even though she's also had to deal with those addictive personalities, which make her treat everyone who comes into her life like that person who manipulated and took and traumatized her, to where when there is somebody that deserves love and compassion, she doesn't even know how to give it, you know, because we are like an utterly traumatized species. Like, I mean, really, historically, genetically, you know, and then we're looking for more reasons to divide from each other. And what I've discovered in this process as well, of the divisions between us, you know, is how they're constructs, manufactured constructs that breed hatred, that allow all this dysfunction and chaos to cycle on. And they love it. They love it when we're all alone and closed and all we do is buy stuff on the internet and, like, you know, distract ourselves. You know, what have I done to kind of get back to the point where I felt like talking again? I just like shut my brain off for like 3 weeks to sort of overcome the trauma of landing back into these cold societies where there's little compassion for what somebody is enduring. They can't even comprehend. And I mean, it's okay. It's okay that you haven't been through something to understand how it might break someone, but you could try. You could try to say, like, why? Why is it so hard for that person to do that? Does she have justification? Well, let's see. She was stalked and harassed by her husband. Numerous government agencies investigated her because of his lies and harassment. All were found false. She struggled to survive in cultures that she couldn't work, but she did her best. She always provided. And then she ends up in a place where she has a minute to sort of make a real plan. And then what do? They break her completely by taking the one thing that means the most, you know. And then they say, okay, now conform, go be a slave, do what we say. And then we're still not going to give you your kids back, you know, breaking her even further. And then what did they end up doing in a place like Holland? What do you want to do to escape? This place is built for escapists. Everyone there almost is escaping in some way, you know. They're utopian because they can't show their emotions, and they don't show them so much so that they don't even want to hear about emotional things or situations. No, don't make me look at the problems in the world. So much better in my bubble. Well, I was in that little bubble. It was really beautiful. And at some point I had to realize that I was utterly delusional, that I was trapped in a bad situation, that my spirit was being broken, and that I had to leave that situation. And when I left that situation, instead of getting help and assistance in that process, I was literally like shut down, ridiculed, judged, persecuted, you know. And over the course of 3 years, reaching a state of intense trauma, even PTSD to some degrees, because, you know, so are they even interested in helping people out of that? Or are they finding that like entrenching people in that is good for our economy or something? And forget the people who can adapt. Let them die, let them kill themselves. As a matter of fact, drug them to death, you know. This is the world we're living in. And it's hard to look at. It's really intense for me. And I look way too deeply at it. And now that I'm personally involved, I mean, I was always looking at it, but now that I've like really seen the depth of these dysfunctions, I'm still trying to formulate how I'm going to go about at least exposing, if not changing, because these situations, because I don't know what else to do. And as a matter of fact, as long as my children are not with me, I can't focus on anything else. I can't even really handle much else, you know, especially in cultures that are inherently abusive. Because the moment I encounter their abuse, I'm like freaked out. I'm traumatized, re-traumatized by these cultural dynamics that I've been taught in 40 years of life are textbook abusive. Okay. We have entire cultures of this. And I don't want to think like, oh, you know, I mean, as a matter of fact, I think I left my culture for the same reasons, only to discover that at least mine has a little bit more of a heart than the other. What is going on with us? Do we still, I mean, are we capable of caring? Are we capable of love? Are we capable of love? Do we even know what love is? How do you define it? What is it? Is it somebody coming into your life that gives you things you want? Is it someone coming into your life that feeds your ego all the time? Is it someone, I mean, this is not love. This is like some Hollywood perception of like capitalism, materialism. It's why so many people are divorcing. It's why so many people are unhappy, because nobody even knows what love is anymore. You know, most people don't even want it. Like, that's how much they don't know what love is. So much so that they don't want it in their lives. That is how screwed up our perception is. That the one thing that actually I've learned recently does bring healing and strength and empowerment to an individual is love. Real love. Love that loves you, not, even though you're in a horrible situation. You know, like, that's love. Love is looking at your fellow man and caring about what's happening to them and choosing to have awareness about the injustices in our world that are creating these situations for so many people, and about the constructs of violence and corruption and hate that are escalating those situations globally. And we'd rather just not care. Oh no, sorry, you're having a bad time. Something's wrong with you. Not my problem. Is that who we are? Is that how we define love? You know? If so, we have serious things to work on as a species. And all these problems that we've seen escalate in the last 10 to 25 years are only going to get worse and worse and worse until we take some personal responsibility for what the fuck is happening in our world and how we're being bred to hate each other, to not care about each other, to not have compassion for the reality of our world because we don't even want to look at it. I'm so sick of it, really. And I know I can't change it from here. Like, I have to get out of here. Right now I'm trying to get a ticket to London because I cannot change it within a paradigm of abuse that is built to keep me down. And that's what the people that live in these cultures don't realize. That your insecurity, that you allowing people to constantly criticize you and complain and put you down slowly chips away at you. Probably by the time you're an adult, you don't even have that strength anymore if that's how you're raised. You know, we need to care about each other. We need to become aware of the constructs of our societies that are breaking us, that are dividing us, that are teaching us to hate and fear till we're locked in our rooms with our fucking Amazon, trying to get value out of the things we buy, trying to find personal value out of the things we buy that justify why we go and do all those things we hate, because then we can come home and sit alone, lonely on our computer and buy more stuff to make us feel like we have value. You know what makes me feel like I have value? Caring about the people around me, caring about the people I encounter. That little bit of empowerment and love that gives somebody the strength to stand back up on their feet and take charge of their life or get out of the toxic environment. You know, that's what I've learned. I've traveled enough. I've explored enough. Environments are like, you know, we have to be conscious and constructive in how we create our environments, who we allow inside of it. I personally don't want to become one of those shut down people that think everybody's out to take from me. You know, so I continually try to be loving and caring and compassionate, and I'm disappointed in certain cultures more than others, you know, again and again. But I still don't want to become, if I choose not to trust people, then I'm never going to have someone in my life that I can ever trust again. Everyone who comes into my life is not trustworthy as long as I have the belief that I cannot trust people, which is why I do trust people. And maybe it makes me naive, but you know what? It also shows me in the end who I can really count on. And I have been in a prolonged state of struggle with moments of peace. And I'm still here, and people still, I know who cares. They are very few people who really care, you know. Compared to the number of people I do know that want to be all about it when I'm in a good space, you know. And it's very intense for me. I don't know, to analyze all of this, but I can't ignore it. It's like it consumes my mind. How did we get here? How did our species, how did we emerge from being savages? You know, there's first, you know how we emerged from being savages? Some very ancient religions that said we don't have to be like that. Some very ancient religions that told us to wash our hands, to not eat food that's really disgusting and dirty, that makes people sick, you know. That was a big deal like 6,000, 5,000 years ago, I'm sure. To religion also gave certain religions a sense of when you help your fellow man, you're rewarded for that. You know, not that we should help for reward, but apparently most people don't care to help unless there's a reward, you know. So maybe that was like one of those, maybe some alien really planted all those values into us from some more evolved species, and they knew the best way to do it was through religion. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of speculation. But in truth, we were a very savage species until some ancient truths came along and said we could be more civilized. We could be more human. We could be more caring. We could be more compassionate. And you know what I see now? I see materialism and capitalism trying to destroy those value systems that essentially made us more civilized, more compassionate, and more caring. And in the process of that, those people become cold, cruel, isolated, lonely consumers. And it's very intense and a bit sad, because we could be doing so much more. We could be doing so much more. I think I told you in another video, if everybody just put $1, we could cure most of the world's problems. If everyone together put forth $1, even the most broke guy on the street could beg for $1 to put into that pot. You know, we have to stop looking for NGOs and organizations outside of ourselves to fix our problems. What, so we can get a monetary bonus? I mean, you know, that's what some of these countries, oh, okay, if I get involved in this, they're going to give me money, and I better support the agenda of that person because they're giving us like billions of dollars every year, you know. We need to maybe take a more libertarian view. I don't know, it gets deep, because then we have to look at nationalism, you know, which I used to be very much against nationalism, in a way, because I felt like it divided us, you know. But at the same time, when you go as a migrant or immigrant out into the world, and you see how maybe your culture, despite its problems and dysfunctions, which every culture has, actually cares a little bit more. Maybe because those constructs that are exploiting them aren't in place, the people help each other more. Maybe because more people have struggled within that society, they care and help each other more. You know, and I can tell you the societies that never have to depend on each other are the coldest, cruelest, most compassionless societies at all. because, you know, they don't even have the capacity. You know, what's wrong with you? That's their response. What's wrong with you? You know, not that they don't have access to those options, not that they don't even know they're there. Like, I didn't even know how the social system in Europe worked. So when I left my husband, I wasn't looking for some government entity to support me. I was like, okay, I have to figure out how to survive. Because in my culture, there is no government entity to support me, you know. And, you know, outside of certain dynamics, if you're sick, if you have children, if you're pregnant, you know, that's about it. There's no like, I'm a 20-year-old and I just lost my job and I can't pay my rent and I'm a little bit stressed and the government's going to take care of everything and make sure I have food and house and everything. That does not happen in, I would say, probably 80% of the cultures, 95% of the cultures in the world. I mean, I don't know what percentage these little pockets are. The irony is it would actually solve the world's problems and probably save tons of money for people to have a basic income, you know, because of the amount of money going into these agencies to support all these people who are struggling to survive is way bigger than what it would take for the average person to have what they need in order to have a peaceful existence and love their fellow man. And that's all that people really need at the end of the day. You know, because I can tell you that when I'm stable or when other people are stable and they have what they need, they're generally happy. And I don't hold that against you, you know, but judging and persecuting and criticizing the people who are struggling because they don't have those opportunities or options at the time is also very wrong. You know, because not everybody has, we're all different. We are all different. We are all one species, but we are all different. Judging and criticizing our differences is not where we need to be. We need to be where I remember a time when we used to embrace each other's differences. I remember a place where the more unique you are, the cooler. Yay, cool. You're doing something unique, something individual. You have your own mind. There are still cultures that value you having your own mind, your own way of thinking, instead of regurgitating like all the shit that people regurgitate in our world. Most people, I mean, maybe that was something they discovered long ago, is that like huge portions of the population, they don't want to think. They just want to be like that. Maybe that's where I'm too unique. Maybe that's my problem, is like seeing a greater world than we have, seeing ways to build that greater world, but not having enough people who even care enough to even participate in that. And that's the truth at the end of the day. It's like people, they just don't care. They don't know what love is. They're quite happy to like drink themselves to death every night and escape in time to go back to their slavery tomorrow morning, you know. And I'm not saying we're all slaves. If you love what you do, if you enjoy what you do, if it makes you happy, if you come home and you feel fulfilled, you're not a slave, no matter what you do. No matter what you do. It isn't about what you do. It's about how it makes you feel at the end of the day. You know, everybody feels good on payday, that's for sure, you know. But how many people on the other side of that hate their jobs, hate what they're doing, wish they could be more creative, wish they could plant gardens, wish they could do a lot of things that we could do for a living if we were living in a sustainable world. We're not living in a sustainable world. We're living in a world that sustains off the backs of unhappy people who consume more because of their suffering. That's what we're living in. And it's escalating and escalating to the point that we won't even know what's happening until it's too late. I mean, I never wanted to acknowledge the things I've had to acknowledge in recent years, particularly about Europe. I mean, in a way, I do need to get out of Europe again. and go home maybe. But my problem with going home to America is that I don't see my kids. And it's going to be a lot harder to get to them. I mean, I can take a 20-euro bus from 12 hours and see my children from here. I can't get on a plane for less than 1,200 probably to see my children from America. So yeah, yeah, I'm trying to survive in a place where I can't work, and in a place where people do try to exploit you at every turn, and have a little compassion for what you're going through. And that's a very difficult situation for me at the moment, I'll admit that. And if anyone wants to buy me a ticket to London, I could use one. I haven't been immersed in the UK culture yet. I hear it has its problems too, but at least they have a sense of humor, and that's a benefit. So anyway, that's my rant for today, and I'll be back soon. Blessings and love, real love, not this like whatever fucked up definition we're trying to live by now that has us all hating each other.